Welcome to the Ceres Master Class with me, your co-host Stelios, and my good friend David Miller from Miller's in Haxby. As regular listeners of the Ceres podcast will know, we have welcomed new hosts aboard, Kelly Barnes, David Miller, Mark Petru and David Nicolaou. It's an absolute privilege to explore this journey alongside such dedicated friends, so look out for the Pod Squad Roundtable episodes as they are worth listening to and getting to know us all. Our goal with the Ceres Master Class series is to discuss, learn and teach important aspects of running a successful fish and chip shop. The Ceres Master Class is a tutorial series, but we will have periodic housekeeping question and answer episodes to address listener questions and to provide updates. David and I are also excited to have different professionals on the Ceres Master Class podcast to discuss these topics in more detail. Listeners can feel free to message David and me or leave comments on the Ceres Podcast Facebook group and we can add these questions to our housekeeping episodes. A little note on the wording masterclass. David and I see this more as a deep dive, more than as to being the be-all and end-all. So the name masterclass refers to how much detail we are willing to go into on a topic. Some of the topics might seem mundane, and if you've been in the industry for a little while, you may have learnt all these topics the hard way. But like any business, we're always on the journey of learning. We'll cover essential training and development topics to help you enhance your business. The Ceres Masterclass isn't meant to replace traditional training programs. Instead, it's here to complement and showcase their valuable work in our industry. It's a deep dive into the technical side of frying fish and chips from, let's say, two industry insiders. David Miller has dedicated over 35 years to the fish and chip industry through his family-run business, Miller's Fish and Chips, in Haxby, near York, alongside his wife Leslie and son Nick, who joined the business in 2015. David has contributed significantly to the sector. His business is both MSC certified and Celiac UK accredited. He has served as a board director and trainer at the National Federation of Fish Fryers Training Academy for over 7 years, focusing on training and enhancing industry standards. Recently, David has retired from his role at the NFFF. Miller's Fish and Chips has received numerous accolades, most notably being named UK's #1 independent takeaway at the Seafish National Fish and Chip Awards in 2018. David believes in giving back to the industry and has David believes in giving back to the industry that has enriched his family's life and is passionate about helping others achieve their goals in the fish and chips industry. I came through the industry in my family's fish and chip shops. Before founding Ceres in 2007, I'd worked for my father for 15 years. I help customers daily get the most out of Ceres products, but also that includes tapping into technical experience running fish and chip shops. Today's masterclass is about sourcing chipping potatoes. We hope you enjoy this deep dive, and if you have any questions, do get in touch.
So, today's is the maiden episode of the Ceres Master Class. And we're going to start really with that, what I think is the biggest topic, chipping potatoes, or the potatoes. And this is a real deep dive into the learning of as much as possible, more than you've probably ever known before. And I've actually learnt a bit by researching all this to find what is the best chipping potato for your fish and chip shops. Just remember, everybody, that what's the biggest seller in a fish and chip shop? Is chips. So a lot of work has to go into that, I feel. So I think the more knowledge we've got, the better. So the whole point of this sort of section and this little masterclass we're doing here is how do you source your potatoes, what you're looking for, and the need to know about how are the potatoes made up, because it's quite a complex little thing. Everyone thinks it's just a little tuber that comes out of the ground, but it's a very, very clever little thing. So the more you know about that, the better. And as I say, there's a lot to think about. So have a listen to what we're going to say.
We thought it would be prudent to start this episode with how potatoes are grown. I think it's fair to say that we need to understand this aspect of the cycle so we can understand what farmers and potato merchants are telling us. We've broken down this process into 6 parts. First, farmers select the right site to optimise yield and quality when planting. In the UK, virgin land is preferred, with soil testing done to check nutrients and moisture levels. Thanks to regular rainfall in the UK's climate is ideal for growing potatoes, ideally without extra irrigation. It is our understanding that potatoes are grown in the same field once every 6 years or more, rotating with grass, cereals, and other crops to replenish the soils. Planning for potato crops is done well in advance.
Yeah, and then the soil really has to start to be prepared, doesn't it? And that is done by ploughing, turning the soil over, and repeating that in spring. And also they have sort of rakes that bring the stones out, because obviously we don't want stones in chip production. And that's done by a separator that stops any issues through harvesting, because obviously stones can destroy the equipment. Believe me, that equipment's very expensive. And obviously fertiliser is spreaded out before planting. And again, that's another cost that the farmer has to look at.
One thing I'd like to ask one of the professionals that we get on later on, David, is where do the stones keep coming from? Because if they're removing them, why they keep coming back? Like, is there a process that I'm not aware of?
They're just there still. I mean, I love my gardening, and I think I've got everything cleared out, and I come back next year, it's like, where have you lot come from?
Yeah.
And I think that's just the nature of Earth, isn't it? Yeah, Earth. But don't forget, we need those stones to help drainage.
Yes, that's true. The next stage is planting and protecting the crop. Before this, an agronomist carefully designed a planting plan, considering the soil condition and crop needs. Seed potatoes are then planted and spaced according to variety. This usually takes place in springtime to ensure the crop's health. Specialised treatments shield the potatoes from insects and diseases. The potatoes then grow for about 5 months, reaching maturity before they're harvested. A seed potato is a tuber specifically grown and treated to be planted and produce new potato plants, ensuring genetic purity and disease resistance in subsequent crops. They are not edible, and some seeds can produce 16 potatoes, which shocked me, to be honest.
Coming back to the Stell, I think I don't know much about seed. And I think when we got our experts on and we asked them to explain about seeds, that'll become a lot more apparent. Because without the seed, we don't have potatoes.
Yeah.
So, moving on, obviously we've ploughed the field and then the harvesting comes. We've got that from sort of late June, July to late October. Again, remember, this is all weather dependent and this is critical. And these are when the experts, the farmers, come in and either leave it in for another couple of days, look at the weather coming, or do they pull them out? It's these sort of things that they're looking for, watching for the changes in the leaf colour. And they're conducting tests all the time, a little bit like the farmers, when they're looking for wheat, they go out in the field and have a look at it. And the harvest is done very quickly to preserve the skin and the quality. And after the harvesting, they're graded and inspected to make sure that we get the top quality that we need in our industry.
One thing I'd like to ask an expert in due course is, why aren't we using polytunnels? That's one of the questions I don't know the answer to. And that's not a positive or a negative. It's just, why have they chosen not to? I know when I go to like other countries, I see polytunnels, but again, weather conditions, soil conditions, all of these things play massively into how you grow anything. So again, we're not going to make all the answers here. We're going to talk to the right people in due course, aren't we, David?
Very, very true, Stella. I have a friend that's just driven across Spain, right from the top down to the south. And they hit where they used to do the spaghetti western, and there's another section after that, and it is just white polytunnels for miles and miles and miles. So yeah, it's a good one to ask that. It's a good question.
Potatoes are stored in special conditions to keep them fresh all year. Well, for as much of the whole year. The storage environment is carefully controlled for temperature, airflow, and moisture to prevent spoilage. Potatoes are handled gently to avoid skin damage and stored in darkness to inhibit sprouting. They are also exposed to anti-suppressant gas to stop sprouting again, and they are also temperature controlled. This morning, I read a report analysis from the University of California, different report, about storing potatoes. And let me tell you, it's a little bit more advanced than just putting potato boxes in a room. They're controlling, like we said above, for humidity, air and circulation, temperature, and it all depends on how that potato came out, and also wound healing, and they have to cure the potatoes. So again, I think there's so much we don't know here, and there's so much that happens before the potato gets delivered to the chip shop. I think we need a specialist at some point once we do our roundup to come on and give us a bit more insight, don't we, David?
Yeah, and I think if any people listening to this and they've got questions for these experts, and we'll let you know in good advance when they're coming on, please let us know, because we don't want him just on for 5 minutes, do we, Stel? We would like to get some questions.
We want our pound of flesh, don't we?
So really, it doesn't end there, because the potatoes are then reproduced from the potatoes each year as part of the crop is reserved for the next planting. So this is where the seed comes in. And again, we really need to know more about that. We understand what happens once the seed and it's grown, but I think it'd be really good for us and for our listeners to know a little bit more about how it exactly starts. And often, these are reserved for next year, and they're certified to make sure that the disease free, because obviously if you've got a diseased seed, that could spread along the field, and that's a crop failure. And you've got your specialists like Agrico, Isle of Ely, Robert Linley, to name a few. Just touching on Isle of Ely, if you've never been, they do an open day sometime in September. I've been several times, and I've been very fortunate to ask to speak there. It's a great insight into what these guys do, because it is phenomenal, the amount of investment they put in. And just water alone, how much they need is incredible. So have a think about it. Really worth it.
I was impressed when doing this little bit of research about seed potatoes and everything, how Isle of Ely were involved with that. Because again, I don't think we realise how big they are as a company, and also how, I think that what's that old saying, like big enough to be big but small enough to care, sort of thing. And I think they do know a lot about potatoes.
They really do, and when you get there, you'll find that you'll realise, and this is what amazes me, is how much they also rely on the fish and chip industry, because a lot of these growers around that area just grow for our industry, and that is pretty cool, I think.
First topic, should shops, fish and chip shops, buy potatoes from a local farmer?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Simple as it, yes or no. If you are really lucky to have a potato farmer that you know well, specialising in it, why not? That's a great provenance. That's a great thing to say in your shop, that my chips or our chips come from Stelios' farm just up the road at Haxby or Flaxton, and they come to us, and wow, what a great story that is. And I think that's really, really good. But you need to find out a lot more about that. Are they going to be excellent all the way through? What you don't want is a couple of months of them being good, and then they start to tail off when you've already committed to buying them. You can't be in that situation, because you can't have good chips one week and then not the next week, and then you say to your customers, well, I can't do anything about it. They aren't going to come back. So looking at the excellence is the right thing, but to me, it's the consistency. If they are, it's a no-brainer. You might save a few quid and you might make a few quid. That's a really big decision to make, but it's a big commitment. Let's say they're good this year. What happens if they're not good the next year?
Because of the nature of farming and how labour intensive it is and how long they're tying up stock, cash flow, a farmer, in my experience, would usually want to move on as much of their stock as possible to then claw back some funds and turn that cash flow into profit and so on. And then again, reinvest and start the process all over again. So I think you've got to go into this relationship knowing that it might be a short-term deal. Also, if they've sold, like, let's say for argument's sake, 95% of their good product to a merchant, what have they got left? You've got to say to yourself, was it unsellable? Not terrible, but is it going to be the prime product that you'd want? If you do decide to hitch a ride with a farmer directly, the downside is they'll only have that one potato variety that they've grown. And it's worth noting, and we're going to sort of go into this a bit deeper down the line, is that not all potatoes from the same field yield the same results.
Going back to the farmers, I don't know what tonnage a farm would have, actually, Stella. That's the one thing I don't know. Would it be 1,000 ton, or I really don't know what they'd have in stock. But let's say the potato prices went through the sky and they got a great offer for a large part of that potato, and they need that money in to go forward for the next year, they might actually be in a position where they can't do anything other than sell that stock they've got, and that could be your stock that they're selling. It all comes down to the relationship you've got and whatever. So it's a great idea. I think it's a fantastic thing to advertise in your shop. If they're great, you've got no problems. But these are the things that could go wrong. So don't ever dismiss the potato merchant or wholesaler.
I think for me, I don't ever see it as a competition between growers and merchants. If you are local and you can get a good supply, let's say, for example, you're in Scotland. And in fact, Scotland produces a significant amount of potato seed, but not edible potatoes. So let's say you're in Scotland, central London, you may need a merchant to get you the best potatoes because you're far away. But if you're located in Lincolnshire, Herefordshire, Cambridgeshire, to name a few, then you might have local access. And one thing you mentioned in sort of testing, David, is that, well, in sort of chatting about this beforehand, is, are you willing to go get them? Because can a farmer deliver them whenever you need them?
He might not have that transportation to load up and bring you it. He might be able to do it on a tractor with a trailer. And do you really want that? Can he get in the street where you are? What if he has a breakdown on machinery and they've got to get seed in or whatever crop they're growing forward, or you run out? You know, you've got to make that decision. So I think it's not as easy. It sounds very romantic, I think, to have that relationship on the farm, but to me there's a lot of downsides on it.
Back in the day, my dad did buy once or twice off a local farmer that he knew, a friend of his. For the most part, he always used, well, even now they've used the same supplier forever. I remember once they'd usually come on a pickup truck with a trailer, but once he did come on a tractor with a trailer. The shop's on a main road and it's the main run for like ambulances and police, and you just see this tractor there. And you just think, they'd only come from 2 miles away, but you can imagine what sort of trek that's like on a tractor, couldn't you?
Or he's out your shop at 12 o'clock till 12 o'clock and taking 40 minutes to unload. That's your lunchtime gone.
It's great for customers to see, I guess. People that are driving past absolutely will hate you for it. One advantage here, and there's lots of pros and cons all over the place, but using a potato merchant has an advantage, well, this unique advantage, which is they have a lot of stock that's moving. They have a lot of incoming and outgoing stock, which means that they're always going to have a variety that sort of suits you, which a farmer may not. Also, if we're looking at early potatoes, they will be able to get you potatoes from Spain, Cyprus or Egypt. And that's a theme that we're going to explore moving a bit more down the line.
And I wouldn't see it as competition really between growers and merchants. You have to evaluate really the best option for you.
Yeah.
And as I say, that's the way it should be. So, you know, have a think about it. And you don't know unless you discuss it with the farmer that you're thinking about working with. Should you visit a potato farm? Well, yes, you should. You should understand that it's paramount that you've got to understand that, and as is fish as well, it's nature. We're working with nature, aren't we? So the weather's always going to be against us. And in the growing season, as we know, this last couple of years has been not great. I mean, it hasn't been a great, enjoyable start to the year, this, has it, as just a human being.
Yeah.
You know, I went outside this morning, the sun was out at 7 o'clock, and you think, this is more like it, and it makes you feel good. So, but there is a lot of things going on in the climate, and things are changing, and we have to agree that it is. But farmers have a great insight to this, and, you know, they do look at the weather going forward, what's coming in. And I just think it's something you've got to take into consideration.
Yeah.
But I think it's great to even meet these people. I think the thing is, even if you got off a wholesaler, let's say you bought a particular brand off a wholesaler, it was near to you, and you said to your wholesaler, could I go see the farmer? I just want to learn more about it. They would love it. That you'd be probably the first person that has a fish and chip shop that's actually taken the time to go and say, can I learn a bit more off you? And knowledge is power, isn't it? And it's as simple as that.
I'm convinced if you rang the number on that bag of potatoes, I'd love to visit, they're going to invite you. They're going to say, yes, please do. Like, I find it hard to believe that they'd say no. I really do.
You might get cake as well.
You may get cake as well. Yeah. Or take cake and surprise everybody, you know.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But I think, you know what? You know, I deal in the business of wheat and spices, and for me, I go and meet as many people as I can as possible. So yes, if you're in the business of fish and chips, try your best to go meet the people that are supplying you with this product. It will give you a greater understanding of the growing process. It will help you greatly, and it could be inspiring. Usually when you're stuck behind the range every day, you could probably get BRS, which is behind the range syndrome, and it gets to get tunnel vision and a bit boring. And whereas if you're going out and you're getting your feet dirty and you've got your wellies on, it feels like you've done something and you've learned something. So in my opinion, absolutely nothing to lose, only to gain by having a strong relationship.
Why not flip it and say, come and see what we do?
Yeah. I'd agree with that.
This is what we have to do.
The key thing is farmers truly live off that land, meaning that their land has to be able for them to provide for their families. So they'd be proud to show you around. Genuinely. One of the things I wanted to just touch on here is that early on you mentioned about the Isle of Ely Open Day.
Yeah.
It's every September. It's only round the corner. So mark the date, get in touch with Isle of Ely, make sure you take your wellies and go and have a good day and learn something. Because why not? It's what we're here for.
So, Stel, I think really, can we just take a moment to actually discuss a really good relationship with potato merchant?
Absolutely.
We've done the farmer. Let's think about our actual relationship with the potato merchant.
I think they go hand in hand, David, if I'm honest. Having a good relationship with the potato merchant is imperative. It's highly likely that in a fish and chip shop, you're going to sell more chips than fish. And that's if you've got, a small menu. If you've got an expansive menu like pizzas and kebabs, etc., you're still going to sell more chips. Everyone's going to buy chips or a potato fritter or something. So you need a good, respectful relationship with that potato merchant. Without the backing of a dependable potato merchant, your business could be at risk. Remember, excellent chips are the backbone of successful fish and chip business, in my opinion. A subpar potato supply will undermine this crucial element. I think I told you a story when we were preparing this, David, and I was chatting to a fish and chip shop owner a few years ago. It wasn't a customer, it was actually a relative. He told me that he started sourcing potatoes from a new supplier who had a very good reputation. They cost a little bit more at the time, probably about £1 a bag more. So if we're thinking back then when potatoes were £6 a bag, to pay £7, it's considerably notable. His yields were higher. His peeling time was reduced. And most importantly, over the 12-week period, give or take 13, 14 weeks, he saw an increase in sales. He never advertised it. He just did a better product, let's say.
So in a way, what you're saying is even though he paid more, they were actually cheaper to produce.
Exactly. Yeah. And for whatever reason, he panicked. He thought he was paying too much for potatoes. Something must have spooked him. And he decided to then go back to the cheaper potato, which was £1 a bag cheaper at the time. But they needed more work with less yield, and his customers started whinging. Because once you get used to having something nice, you don't want to have something that's less nice. So if you're losing customers, that's expensive. So I wanted to know your thoughts on that, David.
Well, exactly the same. My tip is do not rub pizza to pay to a hall. If your merchant has two options, by all means have a look at them, but just don't go on price. Please don't go on price. Just have a look at what they are. Great thing I think about fish and chips, it's so regional. We're all so different in what we do, and tastes are different throughout the country. So your area you're working. You've got a good idea of what people like. And I think, there will be different prices. I would always opt for the top price because there's a reason for that. And it will probably give you a lower, the yield. If the cheaper bag, it'll give you a lower yield. Peeling times will be longer. Probably a lot more work with a peeler. And then, obviously, that isn't good for you. It's not saving you money. Whereas if you'd paid just that bit more, you'd have rumbled them quicker, less time working on them, bigger chips so they sit in the box and fill the box and make it look a good portion. And I don't think it's always the right way to go cheaper. But you need to, again, the only way to prove it to yourselves is buy one cheap bag, buy a more expensive, put them side by side.
Yeah.
And it just, all these, if you start doing all these little things, you start to look at your business and detailing your business just a bit more different. And one of my sayings is this is what I've learned now, is I don't run a fish and chip shop. I run a business that happens to be fish and chips. And it doesn't matter how small or how big you are, you can still look at everything you do very, very professionally.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel good. And the thing is, things start to improve.
Yeah.
I'm not saying to anybody that I'm just saying there's little tips here that I've used to make myself better.
The key thing is, going back to your initial point there as well, is if you did get a selection of potatoes from let's say you've got a good batch, you're sort of covered for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but you know that the merchant's got some availability of different ones. Think ahead, get them all in, get a bag of each, and do your test runs. And we're going to elaborate a bit more on these test runs. And you might be pleasantly surprised. The cheaper one may actually be okay. However, don't just buy on cheap. And that's what David's saying there. Don't just buy on cheap.
Yeah, do your work and get a couple of samples in. And again, I'm a great believer it shouldn't be just my taste.
Yeah.
If the customers in the shop say, we're thinking of going on to these, what do you think to them? Or your staff, even if you don't let customers know that, because they might say, well, why aren't they as good as the one? Why these are better than the ones you're serving at the moment? That can happen. But don't just take your own taste for it. I think that you need to do a little bit of testing on it as well.
One thing that my dad always used to do when he did like an informal test, if there was customers in the shop, he would say, here, just try them. Like you'd get a tray of chips and just say, here, try these. And customers do feel invested in that as long as they're not terrible like that, because you don't want that.
Well, I don't ever put 6 on a tray if I was
exactly. You're not going to fill them up, are you? So you are a Yorkshireman. You are a Yorkshireman. You probably wouldn't even give them a tray. But no, it's essential for your potato merchant to understand that you only accept the best quality potatoes. And every now and then, we're not suggesting you just do this all the time, but every now and then, if things get really bad, you may have to return some. However, you can only understand all of that by testing, and you should have an effective communication with your supplier. Remember, in this relationship, communication is not just important, it's paramount. So we've put 5 little points together. 1, always ask for the best chipping potatoes available. If you start from that point, from the best, they're going to get in their head that John, hopefully that's you in this instance, John or David or whoever, I'm not sending them the mediocre crap things. I'm just going to send them the good ones. And then number 2, be willing to pay a fair price. It's got to be a win-win. And that's the theme that we're going to have in this whole episode, really. It's win-win for everybody. You, the farmer, and the merchant. And then number 3, it's just as important as the other 2. It's pay on time. If you're a bad payer, guess what? They're not going to put you at the top of the list, are they, David?
Well, no. And if you do have a busy week and you run out and you haven't paid them, they might not even pick the phone up to you. Whereas if you've got a good relationship and you're paying on time, they'll go, I wonder what's wrong. I'll put, they pick up and say, what can we do for you? And I'm running out. Okay, we can get 10 bags down to you. Or they could do something to help you anyway, put it that way. When you said win-win, again, the customer wins as well, don't they?
What about them, didn't I? Yeah.
Don't forget the customer. I think communication with your merchant every week, not just the driver, the actual owner. Some are owner-operators, drivers, but some of them are big fleets and they've got drivers going all over. Don't just give them negative back, ringing them up going, these taters you've dropped off, this sort of thing. If they're really good, tell them, if you can get any more of them, please, I'll take them off your hand sort of thing. So the more information they get back from you guys, the better. Don't think that everybody's got to do it. They will listen to people that they know are good at the job. And this is the sort of thing that will set you apart by getting in touch with the merchant. And this is like building a relationship. And again, we've covered it. Don't buy, you buy twice. And again, let's talk about what we talked about before. Have any of you ever been to the actual merchant's warehouse or his place of work? Not many, I would think.
One of our suppliers, when I was in the family business, was not one. It was our supplier. It was Mitchell's Potatoes. And I never went. I never went. And then I've probably been 3 times since I've been out of the business. And I was thinking to myself the first time I went, why haven't I been sooner? Like, there's so much to see here. Like, there's so much to talk about. Like, and I know they're busy because they're doing their job too. But, I'm sure if you went once every 2 to 3 years, they would more than be happy to have you around, I think, in my opinion.
How many times do you deal with somebody for years and years on the phone and you've never actually met them?
Yeah, it's true.
And you have this sort of face that you think they're going to look like. And
completely different.
You actually meet them, you go...
Well, a classic example is your telesales person from the fish company or the potato company or your sundries company. You probably talk to them every week on Tuesday at 12 o'clock because they're getting your stock order, and you've built up this image. You're familiar with somebody, but you don't know who they are, do you, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to that, I think it's more about, rather than the relationship and joking about and making a cup of coffee or tea for the delivery driver, or bottles of water in summer when it's red hot and they're humping 40 bags into your shop. If you go there, you'll understand a few more of their problems they've got, because everybody has problems, even the farmer, the warehouse, us. And it's how we overcome them, and having good relationships is a key to that. I also think as well, if you've got a good relationship with the merchant, you can start thinking 2 or 3 weeks ahead. And you'll be the first to know what's coming in, what farm they're getting it from, what the quality they think they're going to be. So you're just a win-win, really, a win-win.
I think just on the back of what we just spoke about, I think I'd like to just focus on one thing for a second. It's, what are you sort of telling potato merchant if you are happy to take a cheaper, less quality potato? I think they do send you some terrible potatoes sometimes, and you use them, and you don't say anything. It just goes unnoticed. I think they almost build this picture sometimes of, well, he was happy, or he or she was happy with those. They've never really said anything to us before, so they're just going to send you them. Whereas if you show them that you are giving them positive feedback and negative feedback, or just balanced feedback, like David mentioned, all the time, so every week you've spent a whole week on those chips or potatoes, send them a message to say, just to let you know, this is how I got on this week. And it gives them that they know they can start depending on you for valuable feedback as well.
I just think it's what you should do. You should have that relationship and build it. And I think the communication is the only way you can do that. One
of the things we need to tackle here, David, is the cynical aspect in this relationship, because we're all, buyers and sellers, and, we all get a bit cynical sometimes. So can we tackle the sentiment that farmers make too much money and merchants aren't any better than them, David?
Let's put it this way. We don't do bad out of selling chips, do we?
Well, no, your margin,
fish and chip shop
margin
do
is very good. As in chip shop owners' margin should be very good on you.
Yeah, we do very good, don't we? So that's what I mean. I think you've got to understand what these guys do, and I think this is what we're trying to get over to our listeners is that we do make good money out of chips. As I say, it's the biggest seller, and it's your bread and butter.
It's my understanding that although none of the farmers, well, I hope anyway, none of the farmers and merchants are on the bread line. I hope they're not, because that'd be a shame. If you're looking at who makes the most margin, it's the fish and chip shop. Just margin.
Yeah.
Because you guys have put the effort in, you've peeled it. Well, I guess everyone's put effort in at every level, to be honest, but you're probably making quite a decent margin there. Where the merchants win and the farmers probably win is the volume they're shifting.
They don't understand it's the massive volume, and that volume needs looking after. And if something goes wrong with that volume, it isn't good for them.
I think we should never hate the word profit. We're not a socialist country. We're not Cuba. The fact is, if you want farmers to carry on investing in specialized chipping varieties, and I say that, I'm really emphasizing specialized chipping varieties, because that's what we're talking about here, then they need to make a profit on their year-long investment. And actually, year-long isn't long enough, because as we mentioned earlier, farmers are thinking way ahead about, they're probably, we're in 2024 now, they're probably already thinking about 2025, 2026, and how that's going to work. And you know what? We have to get rid of this win-lose mentality. It has to be win-win. Tractors aren't cheap. Combine harvesters aren't cheap. Labour's not cheap anymore. I don't see people queuing up to work on the farm, David, do you?
No, absolutely not, no.
I think to some degree, when Isle of Ely and all these lot do an open day, maybe they should invite us to go and actually do it on the day of harvesting, because nobody'd want to do that back-breaking work, would they?
Yeah, come and work for a day with us as well. And I just think they do such a lot. Without those farmers, we would have to be importing it, and then you would be paying a lot of money. Yeah. So just think about that, and it's the volume. I know that volume brings in good profit for them, but think about if you compare that to our volume, we are way in front.
I buy a lot of wheat and spices, so I probably respect the farmers a little bit more because I see it a little bit more. And then also our warehouse is on a farm. So I talk to my landlord every day and, and he likes a little whinge. I'm not going to lie. He's a farmer. I don't even get offended by it no more because to him, he's not moaning. He's just talking roughly, crudely about what's going on. And we take it as moaning because we're not so attached to the earth and the climate. Whereas for them, when it rains 3 weeks on the trot, that's annoying. For us, it's, we got wet. For them, it's, I can't get in the field. I can't do this. I can't do that.
My dad was a farmer originally.
Oh, really?
They had farms originally, yeah. So I understand a little bit about what they go through.
I genuinely think farmers are steadfast guardians of our food, culture, environment. They tirelessly nurture the land that sustains and enriches our lives. And genuinely, I know that sounds like I've read it because I had to write it down. But the fact is, you need a good relationship with farmers. And without a good relationship with farmers, there's no fish and chips on the menu. Well, obviously, they can't give us fish. No one's farming cotton haddock yet. Dwight D. Eisenhower, or the old president of America, I think he was 32nd president, said, farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles away from the cornfield. And that makes me, I'd probably change plow for keyboard these days because everyone moans about them on a keyboard. But, it's easy to moan about a farmer and say they're profiteering and they're doing this. They aren't just growing any old spud seed now. Potatoes 20 years ago might have been £3 a bag. Things have changed. We've got a lot of specialist equipment, specialist staffing. It's like I said, it is not just any old spud, is it, David?
No, it isn't. There's a reason why they need to keep going forward. You've got to think most of the part of the investing in the seed. And again, when we get our specialists on, I think we should really find out what goes into this seed. Water and irrigation, to us, we turn a tap on and we pay a little bit per year, but they're talking, some can pay up to £40,000 a year just for irrigation. Labour costs, as we know, a lot of it is now mechanical. We get that. It's not hundreds of people in the fields harvesting the crop like they used to do in the olden days, but this machinery costs a lot of money. And I would think if it breaks, which it probably will do, quite often, it's not cheap to repair. And they're literally just waiting for months to hoping that the weather's going to be kind to us this year, not too hot, not too wet, and just hoping that when they actually bring it out, that they've got it all right and that the crop is really good yield. And then, they're not just down watching box sets and having a good time. They're grafting like hell. They really are grafting like hell. And
our warehouse is on a farm. When we were setting up the warehouse and getting all our systems ready, I was going in religiously for about 6 weeks, at 4 a.m. and leaving at 6 p.m. And I remember I'd get there and Martin, the farmer, the landlord, he was just getting out and getting his cup of tea just before me. And then when I was leaving at like 6-ish, he was still doing things. And I know they're not, I know they're not slaving away for the whole period of that time, but they're constantly chugging away. And his family's had this farm for over 100 years. So every generation of this family is working that hard. He was telling me a story the other day. He went to a funeral and a friend of his, who's a farmer just down the road, had committed suicide.
There's a lot of that going on. Yeah.
And there is a lot of that going along because we're not saying just feel sorry for them, but get to know them, learn what they're doing, and have a bit of to and fro with them. Give them a bit of stick. They'll give you a bit of stick. And, you'll have a good relationship is what we're getting at, aren't we, David?
Yeah, we are.
David, let's move on to what potato varieties should we be looking at? What do we mean by early crop potatoes first?
Well, early crop is again, depending on the growing season, when they've been able to get the seed in. But usually coming to the end of June, July, that's when we get what we'd say new potatoes in. They spray the crop down, kill off the flower, it dies down. And then usually we start using them sort of end of June, July. And that will get us through to when the main crop comes out. So all depending when they come out and when the main crop, but let's say it's 8 to 10 weeks, sometimes 12. It all depends on the weather.
Yeah.
That's what gets us through that summer period.
If it's too wet, it's hard to get out the ground. And if they're too dry, they're hard to get out the ground. So one thing I'd like to ask one of the specialists that we get on when we do our sort of roundup of these episodes, our housekeeping, I'd like to ask why they now spray the field to kill the plants. Whereas years ago, if I'm right, probably when you were a young nipper, they would have burnt them all, wouldn't they? I guess it's probably got something to do with environment.
I have a sneaky feeling it might have still, yeah.
I wonder if it would have given a smoky flavour to the potatoes as well, though. That would make them well nice. But, we have done a little bit of research, and obviously, it's not that hard for you, actually, because you've used potatoes for a long time. So, but we've done a little bit of research, and you can tell us a little bit about some great varieties for early crop potatoes, David.
For example, you've got, and you'll probably all have heard of these, you've got your Marathona, Wilger, Steamer, Maris Bard. Don't forget the old favourite Accord. There's lots out, but as we know, every year there's different names come out.
Do you have a favourite out of those, or is it, again, weather dependent and quality dependent?
I don't get hung up. I think it's good to have the name as provenance for your customers. I never get hung up about the name. All I want is a good quality chipping grade potato, and that is the key that you're asking for. chipping grade potato.
Well, when it comes to earlies, you're not overly fussy because of the issues with early crops when we're going to go into those. But you just want good quality, don't you, David?
Absolutely. And it's just that is the most important thing to me is about the quality. And again, that goes back to getting the quality in. There might be a Wiltshire and a Cord on offer. Get them both in. Do you work with them, rumble them, fry them? Ultimate thing, the taste, and what does it work for you? But there are other factors in there that we're going to just cover a bit later. But at the end of the day, do your work.
A lot of these are great for early crop. You probably wouldn't want to use them as a main crop, like Wiltshire, for example. And I wanted to touch on this because I drive past quite a few farms to get to where I'm going, and you'll see signs written by a farmer on a pallet, and it will say Wiltshire X pound, let's say £6 a bag. It's probably all right as an early, and they've got a nice potatoey flavour. But whether you'd use any of these as a main, once we get into main crop, there is some really good potatoes.
Yeah.
One of the things that we never did a lot because our merchant always had a lot of choice, but I think a lot of others do this, is sourcing potatoes. And we've mentioned it earlier, but when you've got a terrible early crop or even a terrible main crop, I guess, you can source potatoes from Cyprus, Egypt, Spain. That's usually from those areas. It's a Cara potato, Cara variety, which are good. And then you've got Holland and Belgium. But if we are having a bad year in the UK, especially at main crop time, it's usually the case that Holland and Belgium, because they have a similar climate to us, are having a bad time too.
That's true. You probably hear they're not ready yet. We've run out of the main crop. We're going to start getting in from Egypt and Cyprus. But this year, the Northern Europe's have the same weather as us. So we're going to be struggling a little bit. And I think getting the reports is where we'll be. But
and hopefully we're hoping to, again, talk about these things a bit more. Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to mention about the weather, it's one of the things that chip shop owners in the fish and chip groups will always say, and I get it. Oh, farmers always moan. When it's wet, they moan. When it's dry, they moan. Because obviously you do need that optimum window. And if it is too wet, especially getting something out as dense as potatoes that are underground, it's different for wheat, which is above ground. That has different challenges. But for something that's as dense underground, the machinery needs to be able to collect it without breaking it. So I think it isn't just, farmers are moaning because it's wet.
And collect it cleanly.
Yeah.
So they're not bringing loads of mud up and all that sort of stuff. And I think early crop has got a lot of different characteristics. So I think to main crop, and I think we'll go on to explain that. And just don't forget, nature is working against us all the time, always.
I always like to say, I know it's on a wider point, but if humans have defied nature. If it was up to nature, we'd all be dead. So, it's the same for potatoes. You know what I mean? Not to get too glum. 3-4 weeks ago, I went to see Mark Petru, who's a co-host, as everyone knows, and he's in Chatteris, and it's in the Fens, Cambridgeshire, potato fields everywhere. I drove down this road, which is essentially a pothole for 4 miles, and looking to my left and right, all I saw was waterlogged fields. If you're listening to this and you think that we're defending farmers, jump in a car and go see what's happening around. Even if you don't go see a farmer, just go down that area and just take a day out and see what's happening on the field.
Going back to what we touched on earlier, you said about why are the stones all the time, and I said that they're there to help drainage as well. That's the good thing about stones.
Yeah.
Don't forget, a lot of this land is for farming, so it will have good drainage. Yeah. So just imagine how full it is. If they're flooded. This is land that's designed or used or been taken over by farmers that drainage is good on them. And if they're full already, that just makes sure what big problem they've got.
One thing I'd like to add to this, it's not on my notes actually, but it's just based on what we're talking about, is understand that farmers, and we've probably said this a little bit, it pays for them to look after their earth. They really look after their ground because it's profitable to do so, and it costs more to not look after that. And they are stewards of that land. They really are. Forget what the news says, and when they write negative stories, farmers understand their land, and they really want it to work as best as it can. So we have also done some research and found some great varieties of main crop potatoes. And now usually main crop potatoes are going to give you the best chance of achieving a great fried chip for the longest period possible. So what do you think, David?
I've just picked these out. Agria, Challenger, that's a new one on the block. Maris Piper. Do you know when Maris Piper was introduced, Stel?
Go on.
1966.
Wow.
So that's 50 years old. So Agria, what is it? Well, they're really good for French fries, chips and crisps. Their cooking type is a floury, excellent fry quality. They're a nice big oval, long tuber, yellow skin, deep yellow flesh. So again, like I say, if you get a nice big oval chip. Yeah, that it's going to give you a nice big chip that looks great in the box. Challenger potato, mainly used for French fries, but again, they can be used for chips. Don't worry about when we say French fries.
It is a chip.
That's what its characteristics. When you look in the Bible of potatoes, this is what it says. They offer a very high yield, very broad adaptation, multi-purpose, so they could go right across the board. They would work in a hotel or something like that, and really good for storage, And then you've got your Maris Piper, and that, if you ask the British public what is a good potato for chips, they would always say Maris Piper.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
But that's just because it's a name that's known. It's always been known because it's been around 50 years.
Yeah.
Maris Piper, they have a golden skin, creamy white flesh with quite a fluffy texture, almost like mashed potato inside. And again, this is a really good versatile all-rounder. Great for chips, roast potatoes, mashing wedges, it does tick the box on all of them.
I don't know why. I've always had a tendency to like the more yellowy flesh. I don't know why. I just always have, but that's just a preference, I guess. I get the
See, I like white.
I get the boring potato here, actually. Marquis. I think Marquis was a very revolutionary potato. It's a chipping and crisping variety, yellow skin, light yellow flesh. Tubers are big and oval, which is very attractive when you're trying to make chips. Have a very uniform size, shallow eyes. Again, like this sounds like the perfect potato. It delivers very high yields. Floury cooking texture, excellent dry matter content. Marquis fries well and absorbs less oil. Marquis have a very low sugar content. However, they are lacking a little bit in the flavour department. Probably wouldn't be so bad if you're frying in dripping, and that's likely due to the fact that they absorb less oil. Usually, David, I think, and I've touched on this, I think Marquis get a bad rap for being dry. What do you think to them?
From talking to a lot of people this last 7 years, 8 years since I've sort of emerged doing what I do, a lot of people like them, and as I say, they did get a bad rep, or they have had bad rep, and a lot of people actually do like Marquis. We don't go onto them very much. It all depends what suits you and your shop, and at the end of the day, it comes to that preparation, fry, taste.
If you are worried about that dryness, just turn down the dial a little bit and let them absorb a touch more oil. But obviously,
that's right.
It depends what flavour you've got oil as well, because there is different flavour oils. Again, we're going to get into this all down the line. And then you've got Sagitta, which I do quite like a Sagitta. A round potato, shallow eyes again, golden skin, fluffy texture, got a high dry matter content, which is great. Potato doesn't discolour when cooked, which is great again. And again, a very good variety for chipping or roasting.
And you've got your Ramos, another Dutch bred main crop, typical farmer's potato, really gives a high yield, big tuber, meaning, again, it's very, very good for fish and chips because it gives us that nice long chip. Again, they're a long oval tuber, shallow eyes, a nice light yellow colour, yellow skin, and good dry matter with a very lovely flavour. So I think there we've covered quite a lot. I think last year, most of the stuff that was around was Sagitta, Ramos and Marquis. So that's really what most of you guys out there will be using. And you'll all have your favourites, and that's what's so great about fish and chips, because everyone's different, and that's why you don't just have one shop anywhere, you have different shops, and some people will not like coming to Miller's, and that's fine, absolutely fine. They'll rather go to another shop because that's what suits their taste and palate, and I think that's the beautiful thing about the industry we're in.
Yeah.
And we need these different things within our country to be able to give different tastes to people. Exactly. And very regional, very, very regional.
I'd like to talk about some of the notable differences between earlies and mains. What do you think some of those are?
So obviously your earlies are very high in water content, and obviously we're in the summer months. So obviously if you've not got them stored correctly, they can rot very quickly, or they can rot in storage. Again, you'll have, as I say, a lot more water in them. I just think that also, they sometimes can have quite a high sugar content. And when we were discussing this, Stella, I actually said I've never actually seen it in the sugar content. And the way I would say sugar content is they brown a lot. But you actually get, some customers actually love them, don't they?
Yeah,
new
they
potatoes.
do.
And they go, have you got your new potatoes coming in? My wife, Leslie, absolutely, as soon as they come in, she's down to the shop to try them, but they only last for so long, as we know. So that's one of the characteristics of them.
I'd say also they're very thin skin. You could literally peel the skin with your fingernail, couldn't you? Just a little bit of pressure.
Yeah.
So that means very low peeling times. David mentioned they are sweeter because the sugar hasn't converted to starch yet. So they will fry a touch darker, but they will be harder to crisp up, and holding times will be really low, as David mentioned.
Very hard to crisp up, and that's because of the water content.
And also you're going to see oil damage because of the increased water and increased starch stroke sugar. If you can source them and you're happy to pay a little extra, then again, importing over this period might be a good idea.
I think that all depends on what your merchant can get a hold of, what he wants to pay. And again, again, don't forget these are export markets, and if they know the English crop is not in a good place,
the price rises.
They're going to go, well, we can make a bit of money here.
Yeah.
So you can see, again, Mother Nature weather has an effect on all of us.
Yeah.
Even across the seas when we're buying from Egypt, Spain or Cyprus that particularly have good weather and good growing conditions, they can take advantage of the weather conditions we've had. So, look, if we haven't mentioned your favourite, it's not to say that, as I say, we're not saying that this is what you've got to use. We're just, to be honest with you, when I was doing the research, there's thousands of different varieties of potatoes. I've got a book and it's actually got the top 20 potatoes in it. So, Stel, how many shop owners ask why can supermarkets sell them cheaper?
Well,
that's a big one, isn't it?
It is, but I'm not 100% sure this is the case. For a moment, let's assume that it is. Then I would imagine that the main reasons are high annual volume, large single distribution drops, likely multiple Arctics an hour, reduced storage is needed because, again, of that volume. Consumers aren't as variety obsessed. They just want to know, can they bake, mash, fry with them? Just to go back to when I said I'm not 100% sure this is the case. And that's because I just went onto the Tesco website a few minutes ago before we started, and 25 kilos worth of Maris Piper potatoes would cost £22.50 to £29, depending on the pack size. So actually, £22.50 for potatoes right now, I don't know. That's dearer than, I think, what the market rate is.
Yeah, it is, a lot dearer. It only sounds cheap because you're buying them in little packs and it's £1 whatever, and you think, you don't actually do that calculation like you've done there.
It's the kilo calculation, isn't it? Yeah.
Can I also tell you a story that from my early days? Is I used to work with a company called East Riding Farm Produce. So obviously in Yorkshire you had North Riding, East Riding, West Riding and South Riding, and obviously then it became split up into the different things. And East Riding had a shop round, and so they went round a lot of fish and chip shops as well as grocers and things like that. And they started to produce bakers and Asda. They got involved with Asda, and they geared everything up to supply Asda. And sure enough, they dropped them, and they collapsed within 6 months.
Wow.
So, these guys, when they're doing that, there's no guarantee that those supermarkets, they will never write a contract that says we will stay with you for 10 years. Mm. So you've got to remember that as well. So
yeah,
I think that calculation you've done there, Stella, is like £29.50.
Yeah.
Do you know what the other thing that makes me really laugh is when you get the potatoes and they've got a sell-by date on and they're a main crop potato.
Yeah.
And Les will go, these are out of date. I said, Les, how many times have I got to tell you? They'll last till, June. Yeah. Just store them in a dark place.
If you've got a potato at home, the only time you get rid of them is if they've gone spongy. That's it. But for me, I don't think it's a thought process worth mentioning. The fact is, not all potatoes are the same. We've just discussed that. So if it just says potatoes, then it could be anything in that bag. And you have to look at your use case and work back from there. We're trying to make, or at least you guys, shall I say, David, and people listening to this, you are trying to make great chips. So your customers, I hope anyway, are not comparing the price of your chips to raw potatoes from Lidl.
Obviously, I've asked about supermarkets. So why don't fish and chip shops reuse russet Burbanks like McDonald's?
So aside from McDonald's in the UK, and I could be wrong, and again, a specialist would put us right here, I don't know who else uses them in the UK or who else they're grown for. They might be grown on a small scale, but not a lot. They're very long. They're quite starchy. Their dry matter is really good, 22 to 24%. However, it does make them susceptible to bruising. I don't know. I thought maybe they'd be a bit too dry, David. You've got a little story that tells me I'm wrong.
I remember when they came out. So this goes back to when I used to have a merchant, and my merchant was Richard Foster. Now, those that don't know, Richard Foster was the late husband of Josette Foster, director at NFFF, and also award-winning shop Western Grove. Now, Richard was a canny guy. He used to make me laugh all the time, and he brought these spuds in. He said, "These are great, David. Try these," and they were brilliant. And they were actually these russet Burbanks. And when it came to the next season, I said, "Can we get any more?" He said, "No. McDonald's have cornered the market. You won't get them again." So they are there.
They are there, and I think the ones that are grown for McDonald's UK, if I'm right, are grown in Ireland. McDonald's, as you would imagine, have a lot of involvement from the growing stage, from the design phase, from the processing. So they stipulate everything pretty much, David. They're rumoured to be tricky to grow because of, again, the bruising, the high dry matters. But again, McDonald's can make a real nice long French fry. McDonald's fries are about 4x4. They're blanched, then frozen. So I'm not 100% convinced, that they would be amazing for fish and chips. But
they were good when they came out. They really were very different. But then again, that's a long time ago. And I've noticed, Stella, and I think it's something that you maybe should touch on, really. You've said a lot about dry matter. I know what dry matter is, but I think why is it important to understand about dry matter?
This is something I've learned over the years. I didn't know when I was in the trade, to be honest. I just knew what made a good chip and what made a bad chip. But dry matter content in potatoes is crucial when it comes to chipping because it directly affects the texture and cooking outcomes of the potato. For example, the definition of dry matter. Dry matter is the content of potato that is the proportion of the potato's weight that's not water. So a potato, believe it or not, is a lot of water. Dry matter includes starch, fibre, proteins, and nutrients. And it has a big impact on frying. The amount of dry matter in a potato influences how it behaves when cooked. Potatoes with a high dry matter content have more starch and less moisture. When these potatoes are fried, as in chipping, they absorb less oil and crisp up better, producing a desirable texture, crunchy outside, fluffy inside. Conversely, potatoes with a lower dry matter content have higher moisture levels, so like new potatoes, let's say, which can result in limp, soggy, and overly oily chips.
Going to the texture and flavour after what you've just said there, Stel, the starch in the dry matter also contributes really to the flavour during the cooking. And obviously, starch breaks down and create, a pleasant, sweet flavour. In addition to breaking down, the starch also affects the texture. And I think that helps making it a more suitable, creamy product and creating a perfect flavour, it's nice to have that crisp outside and that fluffy chip, that fluffy sort of potato and mashed potato inside the chip.
It's also used as an indicator of bruising risk. High levels associated with more damage. Dry matter varies between varieties, but a dry matter of the same variety can also vary between seasons and in the same field. This can result in lots of differences of time of planting, soil moisture, ambient temperature. However, as a guide, typical dry matter ranges for various potatoes. For Maris Piper, the average is expected to be 21.7, so we could just say 22. Challenger, about 22.1, so again, 22. So ideally, really, David, I don't know if you agree, 20 to 22 is where you want to be?
That's about where you want to be, but again, it comes down to the taste, doesn't it? You might have one that's 19 pound whatever, and that just might be what you want, but that's just a rough guide. Yeah. Again, a good merchant would be able to tell you that.
Yeah.
So going back to the merchant, which I forgot to mention, really good merchants, and this is what Richard used to do. He used to do a little fry test. He had a little deep fryer, and he'd had done a fried test for you. He'd tell you a bit more about it. He'd be able to tell you what the dry matter was. He'd be able to tell you what the fry colour is before you even got it in, and then it was up to you to decide whether it is. So I think, it really, I think it helps knowing it. And another thing that's pretty good is if you put it on your board with your provenance and say, it's Challenger potatoes from Steve Miller's farm, and the dry matter's this. And a customer happens to go, what does dry matter mean? And you can tell him. I think he'd be pretty impressed with that.
Yeah, I think so.
It's really important that you know that. And I mean, crisping industry, and I know this is the guy that we're going to have on. He does a lot with the crispers. That's really interesting how they go about sourcing their chips for crisping. So I think it's good to have a look at the dry matter and know a bit about it. But again, some people might go, well, I don't need to know that. I do the old test, and that's good enough for me. That's fine, absolutely fine. We're not saying you've got to do this. We're just trying to give you a bit more understanding of it's not just a little round thing, really.
Exactly. And in summary, to finish off this, dry matter, it's a critical factor in determining the quality of potatoes for chipping. High dry matter means less moisture, better oil management during frying, a tastier, more appealing texture in a final product.
People go, can I buy this machine or can I test for dry matter? Well, it's quite complicated. I think you might have to help me with the word it's called.
Shall I tell you how complicated? I'll do the complicated bit, and you can tell me why that's all a load of tosh and what they should do at the end. Yeah. So checking the dry matter content in potatoes can be done using a few different methods. Some are more precise than others, and here's some basic techniques. The water displacement method. This is a relatively simple way to estimate dry matter based on principle. The denser objects, higher dry matter displaces less water. What we can do is put this on our website at some point so people can read a bit more about it. The feel and observation method. While not scientific, experienced cooks can use the texture and appearance of potatoes as a rough guide to estimate dry matter. And then there's the cooking test, which I think is going to be David's favourite. Another practical but less precise method is simply to cook your chips and observe the frying results. And then professional tools. So for a more precise measurement, you could use a refractometer to...
That's the word.
to measure the specific gravity of the potato juice, which correlates with dry matter content. However, it can be costly and also it's complex.
Basically, it's a basket. They fill the basket with a certain amount of weight with the refractometer on it. And they literally hang it on it and let it suspend in a barrel of water or amount of water. And then the little scale goes up and down and tells you exactly whether it's, 20.3 or whatever. And people say, can I buy that? No, because it's a lot of money. Leave that to professionals. That's what I would say.
Fact is, the best way to do it is to get a bag of potatoes off your merchant or farmer, peel them, chip them, treat them, fry them, taste them, look at them. That, for me, I think David agrees, that's the best way.
Absolutely. But again, go back to your merchant and say, what's the dry matter? And if he says, it's 21 or they're just a little bit higher, but we fried them and they're okay. This is where, again, the relationship comes in, the trust. Go with it. You're not going to get them bang on 2022 all the time. They're a natural product.
If I wanted to check sugar content?
Well, again, you can do it the old-fashioned way by frying them off, or you can use a diastick, and you can explain that later. But I think the best way is to really just, again, get your sample in, give them a fry off, and then if you want to take it a step further, I think you know more about that scientific bit than I do, and about the diastick, and explain how you would use that, because it's not quite as simple as people think. I think when I did the bit of more research into it was totally different to what I thought it was.
You can use diastics, which are basically urine glucose test strip, that was a mouthful, to test the presence of sugars in potatoes, albeit in a very basic and qualitative way. Diastics are designed to detect glucose in urine for diabetes monitoring, but can also be used to detect glucose in the surface of anything else or the liquid of anything else. So, for example, you get a potato, grate it, create a pulp, dip the diastick in, into the pulp of the liquid, wait for the time it says, and then match the colour. It sounds like a lot of effort. In my opinion, it is.
So do you see why I didn't want to do that section?
And also the other problem is it's the word glucose. It's constantly glucose. Diastics only really look for glucose. Potatoes contain other types of sugars like sucrose and fructose, and that's not going to be detected. Go back to what David is saying. Keep it simple. Do your sample test fry. And also that's going to help build your intuition, Would you agree with that, David?
Yeah, absolutely. Keep it simple. Fry them off. But, if they're oily, soft, brown, you guys are fries out there. You know exactly what you're looking for. And you know that if they're oily, soft and going multi-fry colour, they've got too much starch or too much sugar in it. And I just think, again, it comes down to your great relationship with potatoes. who you trust to probably do all these tests. And I think it's nice to ask, do you do a fry test?
Yeah.
And if you've already got a relationship, you've been down there, you might say, do you know what? Why don't you think about doing a fry test? That's another step forward for you guys to give more information to your clients.
If you're really local to your merchant or your local farmer, invite them to do the fry test at your shop.
Yeah,
nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously we've delved into lengths of farmers. We are pro farmers, as you can tell, pro merchants. And I think really what we need to do is talk about how do we store them. It's just a little guide, not lengthy, just something to think about really. And I think important storage is really good. But remember, we only store them for a very short period of time because they come in, we chip, we sell, we chip, we sell, and then we get another delivery. So it's not like we're at the other end of the chain where we're storing them for months. We literally get them in, whatever your delivery day is, and by the next week, you're getting a brand new loading. Yeah. So, this is just a guide for you.
Yeah. So I think it's very basic. Store in a cool, dry place, away from frost and sudden drops in temperature, preferably in an indoor insulated dry room. Ensure that the sacks of potatoes are kept off the floor and away off the walls. It's advisable to maintain the room temperature above 10. So I would say consider using a thermostat-controlled heater, especially in the winter. You could just have it so if the room's coming down, it would kick in temperature, that is. What happens is, David, and you know this, I'm not telling you, but if the temperature drops to 4, well, anything under 7, but under 4, the starch is going to start converting to sugar, and that's going to give you terrible chips.
Do you know why that is, Stel? So it says, I'm not feeling too clever, I'm getting too cold, so it makes a bit more starch and goes under the skin to protect itself.
It's a protective mechanism for the potato.
Almost, yeah. But you'll probably get a scientist.
And hopefully they tell us, yeah.
Totally wrong.
Yeah.
Totally wrong. You don't know what you're on about. And I think when you go about that thermostat control heater, we'll just have a little thermometer in your spud room.
Yeah.
So you know what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
our warehouse is full of temperature sensors, so we know exactly what's going on, and if it dips between a certain temperature, humidity, it kicks in, everything kicks in, so you don't want to leave anything to chance.
There's a lot of shops out there, like my shop. It's a very old building. Yeah, it's had a refit, all that, but they're old buildings. They're not brand new buildings with the fantastic insulation that they've got to have now. They're cold, and we all know preparation rooms are cold.
Another little trick that someone told me is to cover your potatoes with thick blankets, and again, it just keeps the edge off, and it creates its own little microclimate underneath.
When you go in the morning and your actual water's turned to ice, you've got problems.
Yeah, and avoid storing in damp, wet areas. And I know that's really hard because most potatoes are kept in the prep room, and they're also prone to getting cold because of the drainage and the water and so on.
Yeah.
And then make sure the area is dark and well ventilated. Again, well ventilated is probably more important than dark because you're not keeping them for months and months and months on end.
And one question that I learned from Isle of Ely, the actual potatoes come in like wooden crates. And they're actually only 6 bags high because any more than that, they'll start to bruise. So you'll notice that, you shouldn't really be stacking them more than 6 high because the bottom ones will start to bruise. But that's why, and health and safety, of course.
Would you have it less bags high for new potatoes, David?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Because I think with that, because of the water content, and they can rot quicker.
Yeah.
Do you shift to 2 deliveries a week?
Yeah, not a bad idea. Maybe ask the question at least.
Not every merchant can do that, But that is something I learned that, and I never knew that you only stack them 6 high.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to touch on before we finish, David, just the last thing. Would you keep a potato diary? Like we've discussed giving all this feedback to your merchant. Would you write it down into a little book or a spreadsheet?
Yeah, because I think these guys that do it, and there are people out there that have done it for years and years and years, and they can go back 10 years and tell you what was going on then and what was around. And I think it's knowledge, isn't it? And it might sound a bit over the top and boring, but it's good to have that little. And you could actually put it in your checks, closing checks, or your weekly checks, just about what you were using that week, what they were like. Did you like them? No, I can't wait for these to come to the end. I want some more. All these. And then you maybe get to know the make. You probably get to know more about the farms you like. And then that sort of you're sort of creating in your mind of what you really want for your shop.
I guess if you go on to new potatoes and then you go in your book or your spreadsheet and go back to a year ago, you might see that actually, I had a really good batch there. Ring up your spud supplier and say, hey, have you got any of those, whatever, Maris Bards that you had last year at this time of year? And they might be, well, actually, they're coming next week. It's good to have that because a lot happens in a year and you forget.
Of course you do. You don't remember everything. And I think just having that written down, and I think as well from an EHO point of view, all that thing makes you look as though this is a professional going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and also from the supplier point of view, if he knows or she knows that you're checking these things and monitoring them, they are not going to send you terrible potatoes. Or at least not knowingly anyway. They're just not going to risk it.
No, not knowingly. No, I just think it's just good to be on top of things like that and just look at things a little bit different and sort of, it can up the game a little bit for you, and it just creates a bit more interest for you going forward because you've got more details you've got more details about what goes on in your shop. And as I keep saying, the biggest seller in a fish and chip shop is chips, and I think they get neglected sometimes. It's just a necessity that we need.
Yeah.
And I think everyone forgets, and a potato grower said something. So everybody forgets that they never remember the good ones. They always remember the bad ones.
Yeah.
And I think if you have a record of the good ones, then you actually realise there are a lot more good than there are bad.
David, thanks for your insights today. You've been great, and I look forward to recording the next episode with you.